Hi everyone, before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. It was the winter of 1979, late November, a week after Thanksgiving. I remember the date because my girlfriend at the time, Lisa, kept nagging me about whether or not I was going to make it home for Christmas. We had been arguing about it earlier. That evening, voices raised in the cramped booth of some no-name diner off Route 66 in New Mexico. Outside the window, snow had begun to drift across the parking lot, tiny white flakes falling in lazy spirals under the yellow glow of a buzzing lamp. We were 22, both of us restless, both of us convinced that the open road was some kind of answer. We had been driving west from Oklahoma, cheap motel to cheap motel, filling the car with the smell of cigarette smoke and fast food wrappers. I was behind the wheel of a beat-up Chevy Nova that burned oil and shook whenever you hit 65. She rode shotgun, always with her feet propped up on the dashboard, hair in her face, a pack of Virginia Slims tucked into the breast pocket of her coat. That night the roads were slick with slush, the kind of wet black pavement that reflects the taillights ahead of you like smears of blood-red paint. The air was sharp enough to sting when you cracked the window. I remember the radio fading in and out, catching pieces of a local station before giving way to static again. Lisa had dozed off, her head leaning against the cold glass, when I saw her. At first I thought it was just another road sign or maybe a fence post in the dark. But as the headlights swept across, the shape resolved into a figure. A girl. She was standing on the shoulder of the highway, thumbs stuck out in that universal gesture, her hair plastered against her face from the wind. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17. She wore a pale blue dress that didn't look suited for the weather, something too light and summery for the biting chill. Her arms were wrapped around herself as though she was freezing. Jesus, I muttered, sitting up straighter. Lisa stirred and blinked awake. What? There's someone out here. The girl didn't move as we slowed down. She just stood there, looking small against the endless dark stretch of Route 66. No bags, no jacket. Just that blue dress. We can't just leave her, Lisa said, already reaching to roll down her window. I hesitated. Every warning my father ever gave me about picking up strangers played in my head. But then the girl stepped closer to the car, and I caught a glimpse of her face in the headlights. Pale, almost translucent skin, lips the color of frostbite, eyes too wide, too desperate. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. The passenger door creaked open and Lisa motioned for her to get in. "You'll freeze out there," she said. The girl didn't say anything. She climbed in slowly, moving like someone who had walked too far for too long. The smell of wet earth clung to her, sharp and metallic, almost like rust. She closed the door and folded her hands in her lap. "Where you headed?" I asked, forcing a smile into my voice. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a whisper, so soft I almost missed it, she said, "Home." Her voice was strange, not broken or hoarse, just flat, like a recording played too quietly. Lisa tried again. "Where's home, honey?" The girl turned her head slowly, staring out the windshield. "It's just up the road," she said, "near the White House with the porch light." That was all. The next 10 minutes stretched out uncomfortably. Lisa attempted small talk, asking her name, asking if she was cold, but the girl only responded in short single words. Her gaze never left the road ahead, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress. I kept sneaking glances at her in the rearview mirror. Something about her unsettled me. The way her hair hung damp and stringy over her forehead, the way her skin seemed too pale even under the dim car light. Every time I looked, I swore her lips were moving just slightly, as though she was whispering to herself. Finally, I spotted it. A white farmhouse sitting back from the road, porch light glowing a dull yellow. The mailbox leaned crookedly in the snow. "Here?" I asked. The girl nodded once. I pulled into the gravel drive and turned halfway in so she wouldn't have to step into the road. When I turned to tell her we were there, the words caught in my throat. The back seat was empty. I blinked, whipped my head around. Nothing. Just the dented vinyl seats and a pile of Lisa's magazines. "Lisa," I said slowly. "Did you—" But she was staring too, her mouth slightly open. "She's gone." The passenger door hadn't opened. There hadn't been the sound of footsteps on gravel. It was as though she had dissolved into the air. We sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, the engine idling. My hands shook on the wheel. Let's just go," I muttered, reaching for the gear shift. But Lisa shook her head. "No, we should tell them. The people inside. Maybe she lives here, maybe she— I don't know." Reluctantly, I followed her up the walkway. The boards of the porch groaned under our weight, the smell of old wood and wet leaves clinging to the air. Lisa knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. An older woman stood there, gray hair pulled back tight, her face carved with deep lines. She looked at us with suspicion. "Sorry to bother you," Lisa began. "But—" "We picked up a girl. On the road. She said she was coming here, but she disappeared from the car." The woman's expression softened, though in a way that unsettled me even more. She nodded almost sadly. "You picked up Mary," she said. The name hung there, heavy. The woman sighed and leaned against the frame. "My daughter. She was killed on this road, 10 years ago, this very month. Car accident. People see her sometimes, trying to come home." I felt my chest tighten. Lisa reached for my hand without looking. The woman closed the door gently. We stood there in the cold for a long time before finally walking back to the car. Neither of us said a word for the rest of the night. But I remember, when I turned the ignition and the headlights swept across the porch one last time, I thought I saw her, standing behind the curtains in the window, watching us leave, and I swear her lips were moving. I've thought about whether or not to share this for a long time. Most people don't want to hear stories like this unless they come wrapped in the safety of fiction. But what happened to me wasn't a campfire tale, and it wasn't the product of my imagination. It was real, and it left me with a sense of dread I haven't been able to shake for years. Sometimes I think putting it into words might help me carry it a little better. Other times I worry that talking about it gives it more power, like the thing that happened that night is still out there, waiting for me to pay attention again. This was in the summer of 2016. I was 24 years old, working long hours in a warehouse outside of Houston. My friend Miguel lived in Galveston, and he'd invited me to spend the weekend down there. Fishing, beers, a chance to get away from the monotony of lifting boxes and sweating under fluorescent lights. I got off work late on a Friday around midnight and decided to make the drive that night instead of waiting for the morning. I figured the road would be emptier and I'd be able to clear my head. I knew Interstate 45 was notorious. Everyone around here does. Since the 1970s, people, mostly young women, have vanished along that stretch. Some of them were found in the fields and drainage ditches by the road. Others were never found at all. They call it the Texas killing. Fields, and if you ever drive it alone at night, you'll understand why. The land is flat and endless. A patchwork of marshes, overgrown lots, and narrow service roads that disappear into the dark. There's this feeling that the road swallows things whole, that if something bad happened to you out there, no one would hear you scream. That night was thick with heat, the kind that makes the air feel like it's pressing down on you. My shirt clung to my back as I got in the car, and the steering wheel was still warm from baking in the sun all day. The sky was moonless, starless, a black ceiling over the highway. I rolled the windows down to try to catch a breeze, but all I got was the sound of cicadas and the smell of asphalt. The first hour went by without anything unusual. My headlights cut two pale cones into the dark, and the road seemed to unspool forever ahead of me. Now and then I'd pass a semi-truck, its red taillights glowing like embers until they vanished. The radio barely picked up any stations, so I turned it off and let the quiet settle in. It wasn't peaceful, though. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel exposed, like the night is listening. Around Dickinson, I saw something that made me slow down. A car sat on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. Both its doors were open, the interior dark. At first I thought someone had broken down, but as I passed, I realized there was no one inside, no one standing by the roadside. The weeds in the ditch were tall, and for a second I thought I saw them shift as though someone had ducked down out of sight. My stomach knotted. I pressed the gas and told myself it was nothing, that someone had already walked to get help. But then, maybe 10 minutes later, I saw her. A girl walking along the shoulder, barefoot, her clothes smeared with dirt. Her hair hung in strings across her face, and every few steps she turned her head sharply, like she was checking behind her. When my headlights washed over her, she stopped and stuck out her arm, thumb extended. I slowed almost without thinking. She couldn't have been more than 18. Alone in the middle of the night on that highway of all places. Every instinct in me said to stop, to help. But something deeper whispered a warning. I rolled down the window and kept the car crawling. Beside her. "You okay?" I asked. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and her mouth moved like she was trying to form words, but nothing came out. Her lips cracked open and closed again. "Do you need a ride?" I said. She nodded. It was a slow, jerky nod, like her neck didn't work right, fingers twitching. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. I thought maybe she was in shock. "Do you want me to take you to the police station?" I asked. Her head turned slow as a creaking hinge, and she looked at me. For the first time I could really see her face. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing, the color of her irises. Her lips trembled like she was trying to speak, but all that came out was a rasp, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Don't stop," that was all she said. I gripped the wheel tighter. "Don't stop? Why not?" She shook her head violently, strands of hair whipping across her cheeks. Her hands dug into her thighs, and her whole body tensed. Before I could ask again, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. A truck coming fast, too fast. The kind of speed that makes you wonder if the driver even cares about their own life, let alone yours. I moved into the right lane to let it pass, but instead of overtaking me, the truck settled behind my car, tailgating so close I could see the grill. Its high beams filled my rear window with white light, blinding me. "What the hell?" I muttered, squinting into the mirror. The girl pressed herself against the seat, hands gripping the edge of the upholstery. "Don't stop," she whispered, again louder this time. The truck stayed on me for miles. Every time I tried to speed up, it matched me. When I slowed, it slowed. Its engine roared behind us, a constant pressure. I considered pulling off at the next exit, but something about the girl's voice rooted me to the highway. She looked terrified, and I didn't think it was just of the truck. I kept driving, mile after mile, the road stretching endlessly. Finally, without warning, the truck swerved into the left lane, roared past us, and vanished into the night. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When I looked at the passenger seat, it was empty. I slammed the brakes, the car fishtailing before coming to a stop. My chest heaved. She was gone. The seatbelt still buckled, the faint impression of her weight still in the cushion, but the door hadn't opened. There was no way she could have slipped out without me noticing. I sat there shaking, the cicadas screaming outside, the dark pressing in. Then from the ditch just beyond the guardrail I thought I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost lost in the hum of the night. "Don't stop." I didn't wait to hear it again. I hit the gas and didn't let up until I reached Galveston. I've never driven that stretch of road alone again. Even now, almost a decade later, I can still feel her weight in the seat beside me, smell the damp earth clinging to her clothes. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I hear her voice. Closer than it should be, like she's sitting right next to me, reminding me of the only rule that matters on that highway. Don't stop. It was the summer of 2017 when I first drove Route 491 alone at night. though back then everyone still called it by its old name, Route 666. I had just finished a delivery run out of Gallup, New Mexico, and was headed south toward Shiprock. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the desert air still clung to the heat of the day. My truck's AC rattled as it fought against the warmth that poured through the windshield, and the only other sound was the steady hum of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. That stretch of highway has always been empty at night, a ribbon of faded paint cutting through miles of desert scrub. Off to the west, I could see the silhouette of mesas against a dark purple sky, the last smudge of starlight fighting against a rising moon. Every so often, a jackrabbit darted across the beams of my headlights, vanishing into the weeds at the shoulder. I had made this run before, but something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was that I hadn't passed a single other car for nearly 40 minutes. I kept glancing at the fuel gauge, not because I was low. My tank was more than half full, but because of the way the needle seemed to twitch. I told myself it was just the vibrations from the road. Still, my nerves stayed prickled. I turned the radio onto a Navajo station out of Farmington, static-washed and faint just so the silence wouldn't feel so heavy. It was just after midnight when I noticed headlights in my mirror. At first, they were distant, two tiny white specks on the horizon. I felt almost relieved. Company on the road always makes the desert feel less empty. But within a minute, they were closer. Too close. Whoever it was had to be pushing well over 90. I eased over toward the right side of my lane, waiting for them to pass. Instead, the lights locked onto me, swallowing my mirrors in glare. The vehicle behind me was massive, twin beams stacked high off the ground, too tall to be a pickup. My stomach sank. It was a semi, except something about it was off. There were no marker lights, no glow from the cab, not even the faint green of a dashboard reflecting on glass. Just the two blinding white beams. I muttered, "Come on, pass me already," gripping the wheel tighter. But it didn't. It stuck right to my bumper, so close I couldn't even see the grill. Then the horn blasted. I've heard plenty of truck horns in my life, but this wasn't one of them. It didn't have that mechanical air blast sound. It was shrill and long, almost like a scream tearing through steel. My whole cab vibrated with it. I cursed and hit my blinker, pulling onto the shoulder to let it by. Gravel crunched under my tires as I slowed to a stop. The roar of the engine behind me should have followed, but it didn't. When I turned my head, the road was empty. No headlights. No truck. Nothing but the pale strip of moonlit asphalt stretching back into darkness. My hands were shaking as I pulled back onto the road. I kept telling myself I had imagined it. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I drove another mile, 2 miles. Just as my nerves started to settle, the headlights flared up behind me again. This time they weren't distant. They blinked into existence less than 100 feet from my bumper. There hadn't been a rise, no curve in the road where a truck could have appeared from. One moment the desert was empty. The next it was bearing down on me again. The horn split the night, that awful metallic scream, and I felt every hair on my arms lift. My speed crept up to 80, then 90. The desert blurred at the edges of my headlights. Still, the phantom semi clung to me. I couldn't even make out its outline, just those blinding beams and the black mass they hid. I tried to radio out on my CB, my voice cracking as I shouted, "Southbound on 491 near mile marker 23, anyone else out here? I got a truck riding me." Static. Not the usual hiss and pop. Dead silence. The desert swallowed my voice, and in that silence came the horn again, drawn out and furious. I swear it shook something deep inside me, like it wasn't just sound, but vibration in the bones. I don't know what made me glance at the side mirror, but I did. For a split second, I caught more than just headlights. There was a face, pressed up against the passenger side window of the cab, pale and stretched long, like the features didn't fit right. The eyes were two white slits that seemed to glow from within, and the mouth was open wide, matching the horn scream. Then it was gone. I don't remember making the decision to floor it, but my foot was on the pedal, pushing my truck harder than I'd ever dared on that stretch. The speedometer climbed past 95. My trailer rattled behind me, every bump threatening to send me fishtailing, but still the lights hung inches from my rear bumper. And then, as sudden as they'd appeared, they vanished. No fading, no distance. Just gone. I coasted for miles, heart pounding, scanning every rise and dip in the highway. Nothing followed me. The radio crackled back to life, a burst of static that made me flinch. A DJ's voice cut through, calm and oblivious, like the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. When I finally reached Shiprock, I pulled into the first gas station I saw. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely slide the gear shift. The cashier inside gave me a wary look when I walked in. "You okay?" she asked. I must have looked pale as a ghost. I told her I was fine, just tired. Bought a coffee, sat in the cab with both doors locked, and waited for the sun to rise before driving again. I've run that route dozens of times since, always during the day. But I can't bring myself to drive it at night anymore. Other drivers talk about the phantom truck, sometimes laughing, sometimes swearing under their breath like they're scared to say too much. They all describe it the same way. No running lights, just blinding beams, tailgating at impossible speeds. Some say they've heard the horn too. Fewer admit to seeing a face. But I know what I saw. And sometimes late at night when I close my eyes, I swear I can still hear that scream building in the distance, growing louder, like it's hunting me through the dark. It was September 17th, 1989. I only remember the exact date because it was written in the police reports later, but also because it marked the last time anyone saw my cousin Mary Jane Fonder alive. I wasn't there when it happened, not directly, but I've spent years carrying pieces of the story, fitting them together, listening to old family arguments whispered in half voices over kitchen tables. The older I get, the more I feel like I've been living with a ghost that refuses to settle. Mary Jane was 33 when she disappeared. She wasn't married, no kids, but she had this stubborn warmth about her that made her seem like the kind of person who could fill an empty room. She laughed a little too loud, was terrible at keeping secrets, and always wore her hair teased up in that big, soft 80s style. I remember her perfume too, Chantilly, a powdery, almost floral scent that clung to her whenever she hugged you. That Sunday morning she had told her parents she was going to visit a friend a few towns over. Nobody thought much of it. Mary Jane wasn't the type to check in constantly, and it wasn't unusual for her to drive out and spend the night somewhere. But when her car was found abandoned 2 days later at a rest stop off Route 61, everything changed. The car was locked. Her purse was still inside, sitting neatly on the passenger seat, untouched. The keys were still in the ignition. It was like she had just stepped out for a quick breath of air and never came back. That detail still bothers me. Why lock the doors if the keys are in the ignition? Who does that? Witnesses said they saw her at the rest stop that night. It was raining, one of those cold autumn rains that soaks through your jacket and makes the whole world feel gray. She'd been seen standing near the vending machines arguing with a man. No one knew who he was. People who gave statements to police described him in strange ways, none of them consistent. One woman swore he was tall, 6'4" with a shock of blonde hair. Another said he was dark-haired, average height, and wearing glasses. A truck driver who stopped for coffee said the man wasn't tall or short, just wrong. That was the word he used. Wrong. When pressed, he said the guy's smile was too wide, his eyes too flat, like he was pretending to be human, but didn't quite know how. Mary Jane was never found. Not a body, not a trace. Just the car and the rain-soaked night that swallowed her. Years passed, but the story stuck. Everyone in our family had theories. Some said she met the wrong stranger, that it was a random act of violence. Others swore she had secrets, things none of us knew. My aunt used to whisper that the man she argued with wasn't a man at all, but something else. I always thought that was just grief talking. But then, years later, I had my own experience, on that same stretch of highway. And I don't know what to believe anymore. It was October of 2003, late in the evening, and I was driving back from visiting friends in Allentown. The weather was awful, Thick fog rolling across the asphalt, headlights bouncing back at me like I was driving through milk. I was tired, fighting to keep my eyes open, when I saw the sign for the rest stop. The same one I hadn't thought about Mary Jane in a while, at least not consciously. But something about that sign made my stomach tighten. I figured I'd pull in, grab a coffee, and shake the feeling. The lot was mostly empty, just a few trucks idling with their lights off. The fog pressed in thick around the lampposts, muting everything into a soft glow. I got out of my car, the damp air clinging to my jacket, and walked toward the vending area. That's when I noticed her. At first I thought it was just another traveler, a woman standing by the Coke machine fumbling in her purse. But as I got closer, I swear to God it was Mary Jane. Same height, same hair teased just the way I remembered, same damn perfume, chantilly, drifting faintly through the fog. I froze. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. She'd been gone for 14 years. She looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen her. "Mary," I said before I could stop myself. She turned. Slowly. Too slowly, and when her face came into view, my knees nearly buckled. It was her, but not her. The smile was wrong. Just like that truck driver had said all those years ago. Too wide, too practiced, as if someone had studied 100 photographs of human expressions and landed on something almost but not quite right. Her eyes. God, her eyes were flat like painted glass. "Do I know you?" she asked. The voice was hers, but it sounded rehearsed. Hollow. My throat dried up. I stammered something. I don't even know what. And backed away. That's when I noticed him. A man standing just inside the fog, too still, watching us. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the outline of him, tall and narrow-shouldered, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. I didn't think. I bolted back to my car, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. As I peeled out of the lot, my headlights swept across the vending machines one last time. Mary, whatever she was gone. But the man was still there, closer now, and smiling. I didn't stop driving until I was home. And even then, I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes. Before I could force myself inside, I've never gone back to that rest stop. I've never even driven Route 61 at night again. But sometimes when the weather is heavy and damp, I catch that faint whiff of chantilly in the air. And I can't help but feel that she's still out there. Or maybe not her, but something wearing her face. Something that smiles too wide and waits at rest stops in the fog. It was August of 2013, during the kind of summer that clung to your skin. The nights in Southern California were still heavy with warmth, even when the sun had long slipped behind the hills, and the air smelled faintly of asphalt and dry grass. I remember that week because I was staying with my cousin in Laguna Niguel, crashing at his place after breaking up with my girlfriend. I had nowhere better to be, and the heat made the nights long and restless. That's how I came to know about Bryce Laspisa. Not just from the news, but from being there in the area when it all unfolded. I didn't know Bryce personally. I'll say that up front. What I knew of him came from bits of conversation, from people at gas stations, from snippets on the local radio, and later from the endless online speculation. But the part that stuck with me, the part I can't stop thinking about, comes from the night of August 29th, when I saw something that I still don't know how to explain. It was close to 1:30 in the morning, and I was driving back from my cousin's friend's place in Chino Hills. He'd stayed behind to crash, but I wanted the comfort of his couch and the sound of the little fan in his living room. I took the I-15 northbound, the dark stretch of freeway that cuts through hills and open land. Anyone who's driven it at night knows the loneliness of it. The lanes seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the glint of headlights rushing past in the opposite direction. The radio crackled with static between stations, and I rolled the window down just enough to let the night air in. That's when I noticed a car ahead of me, a Toyota Highlander, red, its taillights glowing faintly. It wasn't speeding, not exactly, but it wasn't steady either. It would drift slightly within its lane, brake when there was no reason, and then surge forward. It caught my eye because it was one of the only other cars on that stretch. For a while, I just followed, keeping a safe distance. Then, the driver rolled down their window and tossed something out. A small object. It clattered against the asphalt and skittered toward the shoulder. I couldn't make out what it was in the dark, but the movement, the randomness of it, unsettled me. I slowed down a little, not wanting to pass, not wanting to get closer. As I trailed him, I caught a glimpse in the side mirror when the Highlander drifted slightly into the shoulder. The driver leaned forward, illuminated by the dash glow. Red hair, pale face, just for a second. It was enough to burn the image into my mind. Later, when I saw the missing person flyers, that image came back to me with a gut punch. I'm almost certain it was Bryce. At the time, though, I didn't know who he was. Just some college kid, I thought. Maybe high, maybe exhausted. But there was something strange about the way he drove, like he wasn't fully present. His movements were mechanical. Slow, deliberate, not drunk slow. More like distracted by something no one else could see. When I finally passed him, because the Highlander slowed to nearly 40 in a 65 zone, I glanced to my right. He was staring straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2, his face slack. I thought maybe he was nodding off, but his eyes were wide open. Too wide. I drove on, trying to shake off the unease. A few minutes later, when I checked my rear view, his headlights had vanished. The next morning, the news broke. A red Toyota Highlander had been found near Castaic Lake, crashed, overturned on an embankment. No driver. Wallet and phone still inside. No blood, no Bryce. I didn't say anything at first. Who would I tell? The police already had their hands full, and all I had was a half-second glimpse of a pale kid staring into the void. But the more details came out, the worse I felt. His last calls to his parents, his odd behavior that night, the way he sat for hours in parking lots doing nothing. And then I thought about that object he threw out of the window. I can't stop wondering about it. Weeks later, curiosity gnawed at me enough that I went back during the day, drove the same stretch of road, scanning the shoulder. It was stupid, pointless. I knew that, but I couldn't let it go. Around where I remembered it happening, I pulled over. The sun beat down on my neck as I searched the dry weeds, the gravel, the patches of trash tossed by countless other drivers. I didn't find much. Just a crushed energy drink can, an old receipt, a sun-bleached lighter. But then, wedged between two rocks near the guardrail, I found something small and round. A keychain. One of those cheap ones you buy at a gas station, with a plastic circle and a picture staring blankly ahead with that unblinking gaze. I kept wondering if I should have stopped, if I should have done something. Maybe he was just a kid unraveling, and I drove past him like everyone else did, but the longer I thought about it, the more another possibility took root. What if Bryce wasn't alone in that car? Not in the physical sense, but in some other way. What if something was with him? Something that kept him driving in circles, kept him awake, kept him from ever making it home? And what if whatever was with him that night didn't leave with the car? I don't tell this story often, because it sounds like speculation mixed with guilt. But every time August rolls around, I think about that drive. I think about the red Highlander disappearing from my mirror. I think about the keychain I left behind. And I wonder if anyone else on some lonely stretch of highway has seen a pale kid with red hair staring too wide at the road, hands locked tight on the wheel. Because if you do, don't look too long. Don't slow down. And for God's sake, don't stop. It was late October last year, the kind of Texas night where the air cools just enough to make you roll the windows down and let the hill country wind carry that dry cedar smell through the car. I was driving south on Highway 281, just past Blanco, heading toward San Antonio after a long day of field work. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. The road was mostly empty, just the occasional pickup roaring by in the opposite lane. their headlights cutting through the dark like brief white blurs before disappearing into the black stretch of asphalt behind me. My coffee had gone cold in the cup holder, and the only sound was the low hum of my tires rolling over the uneven pavement. If you've ever driven that route, you know the scenery. Patches of ranch land, low stone fences half crumbled with age, clusters of oak trees leaning over the road, their branches catching the moonlight. It's beautiful in the daytime, but at night it has this strange hollow stillness. I'd done that drive plenty of times, but for some reason, that night I felt uneasy. Not scared exactly, just unsettled, in that way you can't quite put your finger on, like the silence itself was pressing in on me. I was halfway through a podcast when I noticed her. At first I thought it was a trick of the headlights, just a pale blur near the edge of the road, but as I drew closer, I saw her clearly. A woman standing on the gravel shoulder, her head bowed, both hands covering her face. She was wearing a dress, long and white, the fabric fluttering in the breeze like old curtains. I slowed down instinctively. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, it's not unusual to see someone broken down or lost. But the longer I looked, the stranger it seemed. There was no car nearby, no bag, no sign of anything at all except her. She didn't move as I pulled up, didn't wave me down or step forward, just stood there, shaking slightly, her face hidden in her hands. I rolled down the passenger window and leaned toward it. "Ma'am, are you all right?" My voice sounded too loud against the night. She didn't answer, didn't even look up. But I could hear it then, the sound of her crying. Not the kind of muffled sobs you'd expect, but this low, guttural weeping that carried too clearly through the still air. Something in my gut told me to drive on. I can't explain it. Maybe it was the way her shoulders jerked unnaturally with each sob, or maybe it was just that deep primitive instinct that screams when something looks human but isn't quite right. Still, guilt tugged at me. What if she'd been in an accident? What if she really needed help? I put the truck in park and opened the door. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out. The night was colder than I expected, and the air smelled damp like wet soil after rain, though it hadn't rained in days. "Ma'am," I said again, softer this time, trying not to startle her. "Do you need me to call someone?" Slowly, she lowered her hands. Her face, I still can't shake the image of it. Hollow eyes. So dark I couldn't see where they ended. Her mouth stretched open. Not in a scream, not in a sob, but in this impossible too-wide gape that made my chest seize up. And yet no sound came from it. The crying hadn't stopped. It was louder now, but her lips didn't move. I froze, every part of me screaming to run. But before I could move, she took a single step toward me. That's when I noticed her feet, bare, caked in mud. And with each step, the gravel under them left no impression, no sound. I bolted back to the truck, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hands shook as I slammed the door and threw it into drive. For a second, I thought I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing exactly where I'd left her. But then, as I pressed harder on the gas, she wasn't there anymore. I didn't stop until I hit the lit stretch of San Antonio, where gas stations glowed with fluorescent safety and people still moved like the world was normal. I parked under the harsh lights of a Chevron, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe my brain had conjured something out of shadows and nerves. But when I glanced at the passenger seat, my stomach dropped. The leather was wet. A dark patch of moisture spread across it, dripping slowly into the footwell. The smell hit me then. Not just damp earth, but something sour like stagnant water that had been sitting too long. I've since heard the stories locals whisper about Highway 281, the weeping woman, La Llorona, call her what you want. They say she appears to the lonely, the late-night travelers always crying by the roadside. Some say she asks for a ride, and if you let her in, she vanishes before you reach the next town, leaving nothing but wet footprints or a puddle in her place. Swear to you, I never let her into my truck. I never even got close enough to touch her. But that night something rode with me and I can't explain how or why. I sold that truck a month later. Couldn't stand the smell that lingered no matter how much I cleaned. And sometimes late at Night, when I'm driving those quiet stretches of road, I roll the windows up tight. Because in the wind, just beneath the hum of the tires, I swear I still hear her crying. It was August of 2013, and I was driving west through Texas, cutting across a stretch of highway most people only use if they have no other choice. It was one of those drives where your cell service flickers in and out, where the only lights, besides your own headlights, come from the occasional lonely farmhouse far off the road. The kind of highway that makes you hyper-aware of the hum of your tires, the way the steering wheel vibrates against your fingers, and the way the dark feels, heavier out there than it does anywhere else. I was heading from Abilene to San Angelo late that night. It was just after midnight when I passed the last real sign of civilization. A shuttered gas station with a broken light buzzing over the pumps. The air was heavy, hot even though it was night, with that faint baked dirt smell Texas roads carry in the summer. I remember thinking about how empty it felt. No cars behind me, none ahead. Just me, my truck, and the black expanse of land stretching for miles on either side. I had the radio off because the only stations that came in were gospel preachers or static. I didn't mind the silence, at least not at first. Around 12:45, I noticed something odd, a pair of taillights way ahead, but they weren't moving. I figured maybe someone had pulled off to the shoulder. As I got closer, I saw it was a white pickup truck sitting crooked on the side of the road, driver's side door wide open, hazard lights blinking slow and steady. I slowed down instinctively. You don't just pass by something like that on a road where it could be hours before another car comes through. But at the same time, I felt this unease creep up my spine. It wasn't just the truck. It was the way the driver's door gaped, into the darkness like someone had left in a hurry. I rolled past it maybe 20 miles an hour, craning my neck to see if anyone was nearby. My headlights swept the ditch, the flat land beyond it, then back to the truck. Nobody. Just the hazard lights pulsing against the side of the road. I told myself maybe the guy had gone to get help. Maybe he'd run out of gas. It happens. But the thought stuck in my head. Why leave the door open like that? Why not wait by the truck if you're hoping someone will stop? I drove on. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down, half expecting it to be my wife asking when I'd get in. Instead, it was a news alert. Normally, I'd ignore it while driving, but the headline froze me. Missing man in Coke County. Last known location, Highway 277. That was the road I was on. I unlocked the screen at the next straightaway. The story was short. A 30-something father of 4, Brandon Lawson, had called 911 just after midnight. Said he was being chased into the woods. Dispatchers lost contact. His truck had been found abandoned with the driver's side door open. I swear my stomach dropped into my shoes. It was the same truck I had just passed. The hazard lights, the open door, the way the darkness around it seemed wrong. I pulled over, without really thinking about it, heart pounding in my throat. I just sat there on the shoulder with my hazards on, staring at my steering wheel, trying to decide what the hell I should do. Call it in, drive back, keep going. That's when I heard it. A voice. Thin, shaky, and far away. Coming from outside. My truck carried on the hot night air. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I made out words. Help. Help me. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My hand hovered near the ignition, ready to slam the truck into gear. The voice came again, closer this time. Same words. A desperate, broken plea. I cracked the window an inch. My pulse hammered so loud in my ears it nearly drowned everything else out. Help me, please. It was a man's voice. Ragged, like someone who'd been running hard, who'd been crying or screaming. And it was coming from the ditch on, the passenger side of the road. I stared out into the black field beyond, my headlights casting just enough light to paint the dry grass in a dull yellow glow. I couldn't see anyone. But the voice, God, the voice was right there. I whispered to myself. No, 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 no. Then I hit the lock button on my doors like that thin piece of metal and glass was going to keep me safe. Another sound followed. Wrong. Like someone repeating the words back, testing them out. The rhythm was off. Too even. Too calm. Help me. Please. Help me. I slammed the truck into drive and peeled out, gravel spitting from my tires. My eyes stayed locked on the rearview mirror. For a second I swore I saw movement at the edge of my taillights. A figure standing upright in the ditch watching me go. I didn't slow down again until I saw the glow of San Angelo's lights on the horizon. My hands hurt from how tight I'd been gripping the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time with the engine off, truck ticking as it cooled. My wife came to the door, tired but smiling, ready to ask why I was so late. I didn't have words for her, I still don't. What I know is this. I passed Brandon Lawson's truck that night. I heard the voice calling from the ditch, and I believe with everything in me that whatever I heard wasn't him, because I've listened to his 911 call since then, over and over. And the voice I heard that night? It wasn't the same. It was something else. Something still out there, waiting by that lonely stretch of highway, and it knows how to ask for help. It was the summer of 2017 when this happened. I was 19 and driving back home from Reno to Salt Lake City after visiting a couple of friends who went to school out there. It was a long drive, almost 8 hours, and I had been stubborn enough to leave Reno late in the day. By the time I was crossing the Nevada desert again, it was well past midnight. I told myself I'd push through, that I could handle the fatigue. I was wrong. I remember the time clearly, around 3:05 a.m., because I glanced at the dashboard clock just before I decided to pull into a rest stop. I'd been fighting to keep my eyes open, the road blurring into one endless black strip. My neck hurt from nodding off, and I knew if I didn't stop soon, I'd risk drifting into the opposite lane. The rest stop was small and isolated. One of those concrete bathroom buildings with vending machines outside, and a couple of ancient soda logos peeling from their faded paint. A single yellow sodium light flickered in the parking lot, buzzing faintly against the otherwise silent desert. I pulled my old Honda into a space, cut the engine, and sat for a moment, with my forehead against the steering wheel. The desert air was hot even at night, but compared to the stale air of my car, it felt fresher when I stepped out. There wasn't another vehicle in sight. No semis, no cars, nothing. Just me and that humming light, illuminating the restroom building like a stage. I remember noticing the smell first. Not a bad smell exactly, just wrong. A dry, metallic scent that reminded me of old pennies left in the sun. It clung to the air around the rest stop, strong enough to make me hesitate before heading toward the bathroom. That's when I saw him. A man stood under the flickering light, tall and impossibly thin, wearing a suit that might have been gray once but was now stained and discolored like it had been dragged through the dirt. His shoes were scuffed and cracked, one heel worn down at an angle that made him stand crooked. His head was tilted slightly too far to the side, like his neck. Didn't quite work right, and he was smiling, not just smiling, grinning. His mouth stretched so wide it looked painful, the corners of his lips straining toward his ears. His teeth caught the dim light, crooked and yellow. His eyes, pale and unblinking, locked on me the second I stepped out of my car. For a moment, I froze. I tried to tell myself he was just some drifter, maybe homeless, maybe high, but something about him rooted me to the asphalt. He didn't move, didn't even sway like a normal person standing that still would. Just stood there with that awful grin carved into his face. I cleared my throat and muttered, hey, because not saying anything felt worse. My voice sounded too loud in the open night. He didn't reply. His grin stayed plastered on, unchanging. My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my car, lock the doors, and leave. But I was exhausted. My bladder ached, and some stubborn part of me didn't want to admit I was scared of a guy just standing there. I forced myself to walk past him toward the restroom. My footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement, each one too loud, too final. I kept him in my peripheral vision, ready for him to move, to lunge, to say something. He didn't. He just pivoted his head slightly as I passed, his eyes following me without blinking. Inside, the restroom was dimly lit and stank of ammonia. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering once or twice as I stepped into a stall. My hands shook as I latched the door. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that it was just a weird guy at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching against the gravel outside. Then on the concrete. Then circling. They were too measured, too even. Not pacing, not wandering. Circling. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps paused. The silence pressed against me, heavier than the stink of the restroom. And then, faintly, a laugh. Not loud, not hysterical. Just a soft chuckle, like someone enjoying a private joke. I stayed in that stall far longer than I needed to, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Finally, I cracked the door open and peeked out. The restroom was empty. I stepped to the sink, washed, my hands quickly, and told myself I'd bolt to the car, get inside, and lock the doors. But when I pushed the restroom door open, he was standing right there, not 10 feet away. Not off under the flickering light anymore. He was directly in front of the entrance, standing perfectly still. That same inhuman grin stretched across his face. His eyes were wide, unblinking, shining in the dim glow. I nearly screamed. My body moved before my brain caught up, shoving past him, sprinting to my car. I fumbled the keys, my hands slick with sweat, before jamming them into the lock and diving inside. I slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine in one frantic motion. When I looked up, he was standing in front of my headlights. He hadn't run. He hadn't even moved like a person should. He was just suddenly there, his body casting a long, warped shadow across the asphalt. That smile never faltered. I floored it. My tires squealed against the pavement, the car jerking as I swerved around him. For one sickening moment, I thought I'd hit him. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the rest stop was empty. No man, no shadow. Just the buzzing light and the desert stretching endlessly beyond. I didn't stop driving until I reached Salt Lake, the sun just starting to bleed over the mountains. I sat in my driveway for a long time, engine still running, trying to convince myself it had been exhaustion, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But I can still smell that metallic scent sometimes, usually late at night when I'm driving, alone. And once, just once, I thought I saw a figure standing beneath a flickering light at another rest stop, far off in the distance. I didn't stop to check. I don't think I ever will again. It was late November last year when I took the drive over Donner Pass. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the mountain route on Interstate 80 that cuts through the Sierra Nevadas, infamous for the Donner Party tragedy back in the 1840s. I'd passed through there a handful of times before when traveling between Reno and Sacramento. But this was the first time I was making the drive alone, at night, in late fall. I should have waited until morning, but I was trying to get home in a hurry. It was around 9:15 p.m., the temperature hovering just above freezing, the sky moonless and heavy with clouds. The air smelled sharp like cold metal, and the road ahead of me was quiet, eerily so. I remember checking the clock on my dashboard when I passed Truckee, telling myself I'd be home in 3 hours if I kept my speed steady. The highway wound upward, and the pine trees lining both sides of the road were black silhouettes, tall and close, their tops vanishing into the dark sky. My high beams picked out patches of fog drifting low, curling over the asphalt like smoke. The higher I climbed, the weaker my radio signal got until it dissolved into static. I shut it off and let the quiet settle in. For a while, everything was uneventful. Just me, the steady hum of the tires, and the occasional glint of animal eyes in the tree line. But at mile marker 170, I saw something strange. A figure standing on the shoulder illuminated for a second in my high beams. It looked like a man, but not right. He was too thin, almost skeletal, with a ragged coat hanging off him. His arms were raised like he was trying to flag me down, but his face, What I caught of it in that moment was gaunt, hollow, and pale. I slowed instinctively, but as soon as I checked my rearview mirror, he was gone. Just empty road behind me. I shook it off, told myself I must have been tired or that the fog played tricks on me. The Donner Pass is full of ghost stories anyway. Truckers talk about skeletal figures on the roadside, whispers cutting through, the CB radios, even shadows crossing the lanes with no source. I'd always written those off as campfire tales, the kind of stories you tell to pass the long hours on the road. Still, I turned my heater up and tried to focus on the double yellow lines ahead. 10 minutes later, my radio, off mind you, crackled to life. Not loud, but faint, like it was picking up a weak signal. I froze, listening. It wasn't music, and it wasn't a station. It sounded like whispering, low and broken, as though someone was speaking into a dead mic. I tried adjusting the knobs even though I knew the radio wasn't on, but the sound didn't stop. It rose and fell with the static, words slipping through, too faint to make out. My skin prickled, and I actually pulled over at one of the truck turnouts to breathe. I killed the engine and sat there in the dark, my headlights pointing into the trees. The whispering faded after maybe 20 seconds, but the silence that followed was worse. That was when I noticed something. Across the turnout near the tree line there was movement, slow, deliberate. A shape emerged from the fog, a woman this time, barefoot, her dress torn and filthy, her hair long and matted. She was thin the way the man had been, bones visible, under gray skin. She stepped into the wash of my headlights, raised one arm like she wanted me to come closer. And just like before, when I blinked, she was gone. I didn't wait around after that. I started the car and drove on, faster than before. But the feeling didn't leave. My hands were sweating against the wheel, and I kept checking my mirrors, half convinced I'd see someone in the back seat. The fog thickened, and for the next few miles I felt like I was driving through a tunnel of shifting white. The headlights cut no farther than 20 feet ahead. My pulse spiked when the whispers started again, louder this time, slipping between. The static like they were inside the car with me. I caught words this time. Starving. Cold. Please. The kind of words you don't want to hear in a place like that. At mile marker 174 I saw them. Not one figure, but several, scattered along the roadside. Men, women, even children. All emaciated, all pale, all dressed in ragged clothing that looked 2 centuries old. They stood motionless, watching my car, their eyes dark pits. As my beams swept over them, they lifted their arms in unison as though begging for help. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't slow down, I couldn't. I just kept my eyes forward and pushed the accelerator. Here's the thing. When I glanced in my side mirror, the road behind me wasn't empty. I saw them again, not standing but walking, no running, down the shoulder, keeping pace with my car, their limbs jerky and too fast. Their faces were twisted, mouths open in silent screams. I swear I could hear them outside the car, nails, scraping against the doors, though I never saw marks after. It felt like it went on for miles, but at mile marker 177 the fog broke. The whispers cut off, the figures vanished, and suddenly I was just driving down a clear, empty highway. My clock read 10:42 p.m. Somehow an hour and a half had passed, though the stretch I covered shouldn't have taken me more than 20 minutes. I didn't stop again until I was down the mountain, back on level ground. I pulled into a gas station in Colfax, sat there shaking, trying to convince myself it was fatigue or a waking dream. But when I got out to pump gas, the smell hit me. That sharp metallic scent from before, stronger this time. And on the rear, passenger window, just below the glass, were streaks that looked like handprints. Thin, skeletal handprints, smeared into condensation that shouldn't have been there, because my heater had been running the whole drive. I haven't taken Donner Pass since that night. I drive the long way around now, no matter how much extra time it costs me. I don't know what I saw up there or what followed me down, but I know this. Some tragedies don't stay buried. Some roads remember. And if you find yourself driving the pass after dark with the radio whispering and the fog curling in, do yourself a favor. Don't look in the mirrors. I've never told this story online before. Honestly, I never told it to anyone outside of my family because I didn't want people thinking I was trying to cash in on something dark and tragic. But every time the memory comes back, usually when I'm on the road at night or when I see one of those old instant cameras, it gets harder to shake off. I'm writing this because maybe someone out there remembers what I saw. Maybe someone else saw the same thing. It was July of 1989. I was 17, and my parents had let me drive out from Dallas to visit my aunt in Phoenix. It was the farthest I'd ever gone by myself. My dad trusted me, mostly because I'd been working in a garage since I was 15 and knew how to handle myself if the car broke down. My mom, on the other hand, was nervous about every mile of interstate. She made me promise to stop at well-lit gas stations only, never pick up hitchhikers, and call from payphones every night. I still remember the exact weather that week. Texas was a furnace. The air so heavy it made your shirt cling to your back even before noon. Once I hit New Mexico, though, the heat dried into something harsher, like standing in front of an open oven. The sky stretched forever, pale blue that deepened into violent streaks of orange and purple in the evenings. I had a beat-up Chevy with no air conditioning, windows rolled down, and a cassette deck that chewed tapes if you didn't stop it just right. By the second, the air smelled like hot asphalt, dust, and faintly of urine. I stretched my legs, drank from a warm can of Coke, and leaned on the hood of my car. That's when I noticed it, a Polaroid lying face down near the vending machines. It was curled at the edges like it had been there a while, but the surface was clean, no dust stuck to it. I don't know why I even picked it up. Maybe because I collected random photos from thrift stores back then, little glimpses of strangers' lives. I wish I had left it there. The picture showed two kids, a boy and a girl. Both of them were lying on what looked like a striped blanket in the back of a van. Their hands were bound with what looked like duct tape. The boy had a strip of tape over his mouth. His eyes were wide, too wide, like they were straining at the edges. The girl, she wasn't gagged, but she was staring at the camera like she'd been caught mid-scream, her mouth slightly open, her face flushed from crying. For a long time I just stood there holding it, my hand sweating against the glossy surface. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out of the restroom or from behind the vending machines. The lot was empty except for that truck way in the corner. The driver's door opened for a second, and I thought I saw someone watching me, but then it shut again. I shoved the Polaroid into my backpack and got in my car. I told myself I'd show it to a cop the next time I stopped. But the longer I sat there with the engine idling, the more paranoid I felt. Like the truck's engine was synced to my pulse. I pulled out fast, gravel spitting under the tires. That night I stayed at a cheap roadside motel outside Albuquerque. The carpet was sticky. The air reeked of stale cigarettes, but I didn't care. I locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and spread the Polaroid on the nightstand under the lamp. I kept telling myself maybe it was staged, some edgy art project or teenagers screwing around with a camera. But the fear in their eyes didn't look staged. It looked raw, like something primal you don't fake. I didn't sleep well. Every time a truck rolled by on the highway, headlights cut through the gaps in the curtains, and I'd bolt upright. Around 3 a.m, there was a knock on the door. Not loud, just 2 faint taps. I froze. My aunt had told me once, never open motel doors after midnight unless you called for something. I waited, heart pounding, listening. The knock didn't come again, but when I looked through the peephole, the parking lot was empty. I kept driving the next day. When I finally got to Phoenix, I told my aunt about it. She frowned, told me not to tell my mom, and made me call the police right then. A deputy came out, took the Polaroid, asked me a bunch of questions. Where exactly did I find it? Did I see anyone else at the rest stop? Did the kids look familiar? I couldn't give him much. He took my name and number, said they'd be in touch if they needed more, but his face told me he didn't expect much to come of it. Weeks passed. I went back home, tried to forget. Then, one night watching the news with my parents, there it was. They showed the Polaroid on TV, same one I'd found. The anchor said it had been connected to a missing boy in Florida. They didn't know who the girl was. They didn't know who took the picture. I almost threw up. My mom clutched my arm and asked if that was the photo I'd found. I just nodded. For months I had nightmares. The boy's eyes would follow me in my dreams. The girl's mouth would start to move like she was trying to say something, but no sound came out. Sometimes I'd wake up with a taste of duct tape in my mouth even though I'd never touched the stuff. I never heard back from the deputy. Never heard from the FBI, even though the news said they were involved. The Polaroid just became one of those unsolved mysteries people whispered about. For everyone else, it was a curiosity, something to speculate on. For me, it was a weight I carried, because I knew exactly where it had been, lying in the dirt by a rest stop, like whoever left it there wanted it to be found. Sometimes I wonder about that truck driver in the corner of the lot, about the knock at the motel door hours later. Was someone following me because I had the photo? Did they want it back? Or were they making sure I had seen it? It's been more than 30 years and I still don't have answers. But every time I drive across New Mexico, I can't stop myself from checking the asphalt shoulders, the gravel, pull-offs, the spaces between vending machines and restrooms. Because if I found one photo, maybe there were others. Maybe there still are. And maybe whoever left them is still out there, waiting for someone else to pick one up.